Hey folks, Corey here with Piston Store Wargaming. Today I'm going to show you how to make a simple, effective ruined city base using Astrogranite debris and adding a few extra details. I use this basing technique so my Imperial Fist army matches my ruined city tiles gaming board. If you want to know more about these, you can check out the link in the description down below. To get started, here's a look at the paints and details I'll be using. Okay, so here's the Blade Guard Veteran that I've been working on for the last couple of videos. As you see, I've already painted some black around the very lip of the base. Don't really need to do this on the interior of the base. It's not really necessary with the Astrogranite because it will cover over well. I've just had a little bit of a problem with a little bit of the lip being exposed when you go around to actually make the final pass on the rim of the base with black. I'm going to grab the Astrogranite. I'm going to use the Citadel texture tool. It just works really well for this. Small enough to get in the other way around if you'd like, but this is my preference here. I'll get a big dollop, start pushing it down, and move it around the model. This is pretty much exactly how GW tells you to do it. When you get in close to other locations, flip it around to use the narrow end. So this is pretty straightforward. You can put this on as thick or as thin as you'd like. It really dries with a nice gravelly effect because it's got that texture material in it. Just keep adding more to the base as you go. I'm going to cut away now, and we'll come back when the material's been applied to the entire base. Now that the Astrogranite's been applied, you have a little bit of working time, and this is when I like to add some embellishments to the base. In this case today, I'm just going to use some Woodland Scenics Talus, some rock here. Just going to secure it with a little bit of super glue. You can do this before you apply the Astrogranite if you want, but it makes it a little bit trickier to maneuver around. There's enough of a problem trying to move around the model. It's easy enough to make a little slot in the base for these, in the Astrogranite for these to go on. So I'm using the thin end again of the texture tool, and I'm just going to go in here, pick a spot right about here. I want to put a couple of rocks there and a little bit of a bunch. So I'm going to scrape out like a hole, and then we'll grab the super glue, drop some super glue in that hole, then put some rocks right on top of that. I'm using some gel super glue just to drop there. And then pick out a couple of rocks just to kind of make into a pile and drop them in. You can use some tweezers here if you'd like. I just generally use the tool here once I get everything in place. And then kind of build the Astrogranite debris texture right back in to make it look like those have been sitting there in the debris. And you can do this as much or as little as you like. You can use skulls if you want from the GW Skulls box. I have a box sitting right over there. Or you could use some sprue to maybe look like a piece of steel. I'm going to keep working around some of these rocks while this Astrogranite debris is still wet. After that, I'm going to let the Astrogranite debris dry, probably about an hour, and then before we get into the next step. Okay, I added a few more rocks to the base, both in the front and in the back there. And you can see that the texture paint has all dried out, making a nice gravelly effect. Next step now is going to be to do some shading. I use Agrax Earthshade on the rocks to give a little bit of a different color, and then Nuln Oil on the entire rest of the base. You can move between these one right after the other. You don't have to wait for the first one to dry. And it's okay if you mix them up a little bit too. Again, this is just to provide a little bit of color variation once things actually dry. And once I'm done with the Agrax Earthshade, move right on to the Nuln Oil. Just going to saturate the entire base. Being careful again not to get anything on my Space Marine here. So I'm going to finish off shading the rest of the base here. Let this dry. And now that the shades are dry, I'm going to move to a dry brush using Terminatus Stone over the entire base, including the stones or any other details to kind of tie them in. If you're dry brushing over the base, it's okay to get a little bit on the model. It helps kind of tie it in. Kind of subtle with this light of a color, but if you're doing like, say, a Mars base, the red could be very evident. So with the dry brush now complete, I'm going to move on to some tufts as a final detail and to add a little bit of color to that otherwise washed out base. I'm using some Army Painter Swamp tufts here. One of the things you can do with these tufts is, if you really like to, you could use your X-Acto blade and cut these tufts in half or in thirds or whatever to kind of fit on your base how you'd like it to look. You can see here I've done that already on a few of my previous models with the cuts in the paper and the backing. For this particular one, I don't think I'm going to need to do that. First thing first, I'm thinking I'm just going to put one right smack in between those two sets of rocks. Grab my handy tweezers. These should just be peel and stick, so we'll just grab one of these medium-sized tufts here, and we'll stick it right down where we want it. Some people like to put a little dot of super glue under this, but I don't tend to find it necessary. These have been sticking pretty well for me. And you can use the tweezers to kind of tease up the grass a little bit to make it kind of sit where you'd like. Now it's time for the final step, which is, of course, to paint the rim of the base. Quick little trick here that I picked up along the way. I think I learned this from Jeremy at Black Magic Craft, is to turn this upside down, use some blue tack, and stick your model back on top. And now we have access to the rim of the base. So I'm just going to use some thinned out black here. I prefer to make 2 thin coats on this and just work my way around. I pick a spot, I usually pick the left foot as a starting point, just so I know where I started, and begin working my way around. If you're doing multiple models here, you'll be able to work down your assembly line and come right back to this one, and it should be dry to put the second coat on. So I'm just going to work my way through this, let it dry, and we'll take a look when it's done. Since this is a gaming piece, I varnished the model with a matte finish, and here it is complete. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.